everybody, it's Kevin Cameron with Careering with Cameron, and today I am joined by Steph Gillies. And Steph and I have been working together in terms of what are people kind of facing when they get into the career transition phase, in terms of like, hey, there's a mental part of this that's probably not spoken about enough. Also, Steph has worked with quite a few people who have faced that, like, hey, this is my opportunity to make a big pivot, and help them to make it through that pivot successfully and to be happy at the end of that career transition and figuring out what's next. So I am delighted to have Steph on the show with us today, and we're going to cover all those topics coming up next. Steph, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Give us a little bit of background in terms of, like, how did you get into the space where you're helping people with career transition and or pivots and the mental health part of that?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. My background is I had 37 jobs in 15 years. So I got really good at applying for jobs, and people would come to me all the time asking for help with their resumes or help with interviews, and I would do it. And then I thought, one time 8 years ago, I was like, I wonder if I could turn this into a job. So I started looking into certifications, and I got certified as a resume writer and interview coach, but I was working a full-time job. It was a good job. And so I didn't really spend a lot of time focusing on starting a business or anything like that. So when I was laid off at the beginning of the pandemic, that was kind of an opportunity for me to be like, what do I really want to do? And so I started writing resumes, planned it to be part-time. I was just going to do it part-time while I was figuring out what I wanted to do. And lo and behold, that was 5 years ago. I've been full-time in my business ever since. I write resumes, I coach, and I speak as well. So I do speaking engagements as well as workshops on different career development topics. And one of my favorite topics to talk about is the link between career development and mental health. So I have a bachelor's of social work as well. And so I've spent a lot of time in that world. And, after working with so many people who've been laid off in the job search, it just really became apparent to me that we don't talk about this enough, how much our mental health is really linked to our jobs. Everyone's like, oh, just go get another job. But it's not always that simple. And so I like to kind of talk about that kind of stuff.
I love that. So before we get too far into this, should we take a moment of silence for your tax accountant for when you had the 37 jobs, like, and all those W-9s and things that came through, the W-2s, sorry, not W-9s, W-2s that came through? Are you still on talking terms with them or no? Like,
I don't even remember. Honestly, I don't even remember.
They must have been like, wait, when are they going to stop? But no, I think, it's funny you bring up, it's not funny, haha funny, but it's funny you bring it up. The connection between mental health and job changing, it's not as dominant as it used to be, but the example I'm using is, and what comes to mind is, the first time you go out to meet people and you don't have a business card that's linked to a company is like a moment in and of itself that I think a lot of people are not prepared for. And it's that, like, who am I? I don't have a company now to talk about. Like, who am I? And so, is that like, where is the beginning of the mental health piece that you see with people that you're working with?
Yeah, I think it's kind of all the way through the process, right? It starts with employees who are potentially in, jobs where they're maybe undervalued. They're not doing work they're really excited about, so they burn out, or they're doing, they're doing too much work and then they burn out at work. Those pieces, and also like toxic work environments. So I was also in a toxic work environment, and it really takes a toll on, your day-to-day and your mental health when you're going to that every single day. It can be really challenging. So I think there's a piece of that for people who are currently employed. Then there's the piece of people who've been laid off unexpectedly. Right? Sometimes people take a layoff and they're like, oh, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. And to be honest, when I was laid off, that was what it was for me, because the job was so toxic that when I was laid off, it was a great opportunity. But for a lot of people, especially people who didn't plan to retire early, have been 30 years in a job, those kinds of things, it can be really overwhelming and shocking to be laid off. And so that can take a toll. And then the third piece is the job search process. I see a lot of people who really struggle in that process. So maybe they even left their job amicably. Maybe they were laid off and they were fine about it, but now they've been looking for a job for 300 days. Like, how do you manage that? How do you manage all those rejections? And how do you still keep your confidence high while you're still going through this process where you're getting rejected over and over and over again? So I think there's like 3 different areas to it.
So important in terms of admitting that that's a feeling you're having, I think is the first part, right? And I agree. I think most people, for the most part, I'm going to say like 90% of the people I've ever encountered who've gone through a career transition, after the fact, at some point say, you know what? I wouldn't have chosen that at that point in time. But in the end, it was an experience that I learned from, and an experience that opened a door for me to make a move that I probably would not have made the move for before. And I wasn't happy at that point. How do you start the process of saying, I'm really uncomfortable, unhappy in this role? And maybe you're not in the population that you're going to be affected by a layoff. Maybe you're employed and you're like, I'm just really not happy in my role. Like, where do you begin?
I think it really starts with admitting that, because a lot of people will stay in jobs because they just don't want to admit it, because the alternative is really scary. And that's true. And so the big thing that I notice is a lot of people undervalue themselves. And so they don't think they have as many career options as they have. So even myself, when I was in that really challenging job, I didn't think I had career options. I was applying to jobs like way below my skill level. I wasn't getting interviews because I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest. And a lot of people are in that same spot. They come to me and they're applying to these jobs that are just like way below their skill level. And they're like, oh, this is all I think I can get right now. And then I look at their resume, I have a conversation with them and I'm like, no, you can definitely do more. And then once they start applying to jobs that are actually in line with their skills, they start to see those interviews coming in. So I think the biggest thing first is acknowledging that you're not happy. And then the second thing is really exploring what your options are. So, and sometimes you can do that yourself. Sometimes you need an external person like a coach like yourself or me to help you see what you don't know. And if you think, so that you can really see what options you have out there. And when you can start to see those options, you really start to get excited about the future and be like, oh, there's more things that I could do than I realized. And maybe I don't have to be stuck in this position.
Yeah, that intuition component is a very strong indicator in terms of at least find somebody outside of yourself to talk to. And it may not even be a coach. It may just be a family member that you say like, hey, when I come home and everybody hides, is that because of my job? That's one of the things that can kind of let the cat out of the bag in terms of what's going on. So, what about, there is obviously a phenomenally huge moment of fear, and that happens either because somebody causes it or because the person's like, I need to make a change here. Both of us have started businesses, so that fear, I think, is something that is really no longer. But maybe instead is a more of a dull hum in the background in terms of fear, right? But I think that feeling in your stomach, the pit that you get of, am I really going to do this, and am I really going to be able to survive when I make this change? Is something that people really struggle with. And I think a lot of times they choose to be unhappy and choose to be uncomfortable because that pit becomes so large that they can't possibly see their way around it. Any advice on dealing with that giant pit?
Yeah, that is such a tough one because it's true. Like, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. It's like you can jump into a new job, and I've had people come to me and they're like, I jumped ship and I regret it. I wish I never did. And that can happen for sure. But there always ends up being stepping stones to other spots in their career. But what I think is the most important, and one of the things I would have taught myself back before I tried the 37 jobs, was really doing informational interviews. Because what a lot of people will do is they're like, oh, that job looks interesting. This is what I did. That job looks interesting. Applied for it, tried it for 6 months. It wasn't really for me. This job looks interesting. Applied, tried it, didn't really like it. Or if you're like not in your early 20s, you probably stay a year or more to make sure that it looks good on your resume. So now you're committing these times of your life to these jobs that might not be super exciting or might not even be in line with your skills. And so informational interviewing, for anyone who's not aware, is where you just go and you talk to people who are in roles that you might be interested in. So if I was interested in a project management position, I'd go find a project manager, talk to them about what the day-to-day looks like. And so I do this with a lot of my clients. We come up with a list of potential jobs they might be interested in. And that list can sometimes be really long. And then I encourage them to go have conversations with people and see if they really fit and if it sounds good. And sometimes they come back to me and they're like, I have bad news. I eliminated 5 jobs. And I'm like, that's great news. That's exactly what we want. Let's eliminate those and narrow it down to what you actually want to do. And then you'll be happier when you move into it. You might not have the perfect working environment. You might not have the perfect boss or anything like that. But if you can find the right role and move into it, and even if it's not a great working environment, you can then move into another company and you're at least in a role that you're really excited about.
Yeah. I think having the parachute on the back and jumping out of the plane with no target is a pretty big challenge. I love the informational interview concept because you have a target now. You know where you're going, which makes that much easier and much more defined. And the strategy becomes clear. But also the other piece of that, which I love, is you have a friend now who does what you would like to be doing and probably works in a company that hires other people, I'm going to guess. So that could turn into more than just an informational interview. And many times it does because, when we're talking about that recruitment piece, the fit is important. So the fact that you want to do this work says to them like, hey, this is a pretty low risk. Like this person actually likes this stuff. So I think that that's also a helpful piece. And I love that when you're working with people, you're putting them in that direction to say like, hey, let's figure out which one of the different roads we're going to take here going forward. So very helpful. All right, let's talk about our friends who get notice on hopefully not a Friday, hopefully not a Monday, but they get a notice that this is their last day. May or may not have severance. Hopefully they do. Employers out there, please don't send people out with no severance, or for that matter, no outplacement. Give them the help that they need, because then they will also turn and help you by saying, hey, I didn't get to stay, but they took care of me to make sure I landed softly. Let's talk about the first couple of days. So the first couple of days, you get up on a Wednesday morning, you find out Tuesday, Wednesday morning, you have nothing that you have to do. What do you do with that?
Yeah, I think like the biggest part of that a lot of people will just blow past and they'll just jump into outplacement or writing the resume right away is taking at least a little bit of time to grieve the loss. Yep. Even if it's a job you're not even excited about, even if it was a job you were like, I was going to leave that job anyways, or you're like, this is the best thing that could have happened, there's still going to be a little bit of grieving that goes on when you do leave a job. And so you have to allow that time, and it will come in waves. You're not going to plan it perfectly, but taking a day or two for yourself, especially if you're someone, which a lot of my clients are, people who've just worked their entire career and they've never really taken time off. Like take a few days, take a week, whatever, to just have a little bit of time to just land back at home with yourself, process what happened, and see what you really want next. Because when we just dive into, okay, I'm in a job search, and then you're right into the job searching, which, as we know, can be a full-time job. You're job searching and then you go into the next job and you're so burnt out by the time you get there that you can't give your best to this new job. So, and then sometimes you're in a new job that you're like, oh, this isn't even what I wanted. What am I doing here? So taking a little bit of time for yourself to really do that self-exploration can make a huge difference, whether it's on your own, with a coach, with a therapist, with a family friend or mentor, whoever that's with. I think it's really important to take that time to have those conversations and to just get that, idea of what comes next in your career.
Yeah. It's a relationship. And there are relationships with the people that you worked with as well that you're still going to kind of grieve. Like, while, yes, it's not like they're on in witness protection at that point, I guess maybe, but really it's a situation where you're not going to be spending as much time as you were with them. And a lot of the folks, hopefully, that you work with are also friends. So So that's a big component. And also, what do I say when people ask? What should we say? Like, what do we recommend in terms of like bringing up, like, I'm looking for a new opportunity, but before that even happens, before we get to that component of the conversation, we're in this span where there's a couple days and there are going to be phone calls coming saying, hey, are you all right? What's going on? What do we do with that?
Yeah. I mean, that's up to you how much information you want to share. I always tell people, like, because when I do the interview coaching piece of it, I always say there was a restructuring because that's the safest way to talk about it. If you're close with them, you can share, more if that's something you want to do. But if it's someone you're not close with, I would just call it. I usually encourage people to call it a restructuring. And unfortunately, you were part of the team. Yes. I had someone who was on a really small team. And she said there was a 10% restructure. It was just her, but it was 10% of the company.
It still works.
And I was like, nice. Yeah, 10% restructure. That's perfect. So something that makes you feel confident in talking about it. And also don't feel like you have to have those conversations with people right away, right? Take your time. If you're not ready to have those conversations, don't have them immediately. Take some time to yourself, figure out what you want to say, and then decide from there how you want to move forward.
And there's also usually a window after that conversation where there are agreements and things going back and forth. So it might be better to just say, hey, let me give you a call. There's a lot of things going on right now. I'll give you a call back in a few days. Agree 100%. I love the restructuring. That's definitely a very safe way to go about it. Absolutely the recommendation that I would have as well. And I think giving it a percentage makes it better because it shows that they're being strategic. And so there's something's going on that they're going in a different direction. And that's just what happens sometimes. Okay, let's circle back. So from a mental health perspective, how can we kind of protect ourselves in going through this process? Like, what are the recommendations that you have when you're working with clients on, let's be focused on mental health and care for ourselves through this process?
Through the job search process?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing about it is one of the things that I share with everyone is the statistics. And I don't have them right in front of me now, but I know them approximately, is really making sure that people understand what the statistics are. Because people will come to me and they'll be like, I need help with my resume. I'm not getting very many interviews. And then I'll say, okay, like, have you been tracking? Yes. Okay. How many interviews are you getting? Oh, for every 100 applications, I'm getting like 5 interviews. That's actually right in line with the percentages. The percentage of response to online applications is anywhere from 3 to 6%. And so when people know those numbers, even though they're not great numbers, they're kind of sad numbers, at least you know that you're in line with the expectations. So then I tell them, you don't need help with your resume. What you need help with is maybe the next step of the process, interviewing, networking, building other tools in your toolbox for the job search. So you're not only applying online, because if you're getting that 5% response rate to your online applications, then you're actually in line with the statistics. And so then it becomes, what is the rest of the strategy that needs to be supported or could be built upon? And so that, knowing the numbers can be really helpful, because that just helps people feel a little more confident. Oh, okay, I'm doing the right things. Now I know what to track, and I know when I'm doing the right things and when I'm not doing the right things. So I think that's really important to know and can help to build people's confidence. And I don't know the exact numbers right off the top of my head, but there's a certain number of interviews that people typically go through before they get an offer. And so looking up those numbers and getting familiar with that process as well. And then I always encourage people to track. If you're falling off of your job search at different stages, then that usually means that's a specific area that you need to focus on. So if every time I'm falling off, I'm not getting any interviews, then you probably need to work on your resume. If I'm falling off at the second interview, then you probably need to work on your, later interview skills. I had a client who was falling off. She passed all the interviews multiple times and was falling off at the reference stage when she contacted me. And I said, you need to reach out to your references and find out what's going on. And lo and behold, she had a reference that was not saying great things, which was really weird because he gave her a really positive review before he left. But yeah, so when you can track and find out where in the process the roadblock is or the break is, then that's something that you know that you can focus on. If you look through the entire process and it's different every time, that's great. That usually means that you're doing something well at throughout the entire process. So tracking and knowing the numbers really help to build that confidence. And then consistency. Consistency is so important. Some people will just be like, oh, I'm going to apply to 100 jobs on the first of the month, and then I'm going to forget about it for 3 weeks.
No.
That's not going to work. You have to keep filling that pipeline.
Yes. And I also think that when things start to happen, you probably have a confidence that you're projecting. Do them more at that point. Like, do more when you have positive results. You're onto something. So that's really important. But yes, please be consistent. Please track your activities. Especially in situations where you're getting a phone call from somebody and you may not necessarily be at a desk, and you're trying to figure out who this person is, how you connected to them. Like, have that information in front of you so that you can have an intelligent conversation with them, and know kind of where things originated. All right. What about in terms of, and this is a question that I think we don't pay a lot of attention to in job search, but we've got job search and we've got the mental health components of that. What about if we say okay, our schedule is going to be this to be consistent for job search. The rest of the time, how can we help ourselves with the mental health component of that?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is really just spending time with ourselves. I think a lot of times we just distract a lot, right? We go to work, we come home, watch TV, go to bed, and we don't have a lot of time for that. Time for ourselves, time to think, time without electronics. And so when we don't have that, we don't think, we don't have the opportunity to reflect on how we're feeling or to reflect on what we might be experiencing. Or if sometimes, we're too scared to face it. We're just distracting so we don't have to face it. And so sometimes even just taking that one step to be like, I don't know if I'm fully happy here, just admitting that's a great first step. And then you can distract for another few weeks and then see if you want to do something about it. Right? Because you don't have to do anything about it just because you're unhappy. Some people, when I first started this work, I always thought everyone needed to have a dream job. That was my belief. Everyone had to have a dream job. But throughout this time, I've really noticed that some people are really passionate and need a dream job. Some people like to have a job that they like good enough and they can do their hobbies on the weekend. Other people like a job where they can just turn their brain off, go to work, and then they can pay for their hobbies. So really, it depends on what type of person you are. But I find the people that tend to be the most unhappy at work are the people who need to have a mission or really want to be passionate about their job. And if you're one of those people and you notice yourself not feeling it anymore, that's an opportunity to make that change, because you're really going to notice how much happier you'll be in another position.
That's a great point. I 100% never even thought of it that way. The people who really are passionate and have a quote unquote calling in terms of what they want to do, how do you align and make sure that's fulfilled every day when it's also dependent on other people? So yes, folks out there who are in search of the dream job, not saying it can't happen, but also saying it may not be your dream job Monday through Friday. Which is a very real way to look at this and being realistic about what is work actually like? If it wasn't work, we would probably call it fun, right? So, so that's another piece of this. What about in terms of structure / schedule? I know that a lot of people are like, hey, I'm not going to apply to 100 jobs today and then let it coast the rest of the time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay on the computer to make sure that if anything posts at 11:30 tonight, I see it first. Structure-wise, what do you recommend?
Yeah, if people want to condense timeframes, what I've noticed is the typical job search can take anywhere from 5 to 7, 9 months right now. If you want to condense those timeframes, then you have to be doing more, right? And doing more doesn't necessarily mean just throwing your resume into the abyss and seeing what happens. It's being really targeted on what jobs you want, making sure your resume is aligned and super targeted to the positions.
Yes.
And I'll just quickly tell a story around that. I worked with someone who was a director in a bank and she wanted to move into the nonprofit world. And she was applying to these nonprofit jobs with her banking resume and wasn't getting any traction, of course. And then she came to me and we rewrote her resume and really we completely changed it. The entire resume was focused on her her volunteering. And we only barely talked about her work experience at the very bottom. And when we did talk about her work experience, we talked about the community part of her work experience that she did, not her everyday work. And then she ended up getting a job and making that transition to a director level. So same level in a nonprofit. It took her like 3 months.
Awesome.
So really, it's about knowing your target, making sure your resume is super targeted to the position and speaks to the hiring manager. And then I tell people, like most of my clients who are not working, they all apply to 5 to 10 jobs a week and network with 3 to 5 people a week. And that and keeping that consistency, it tends to really start to see those results. And not stopping, like you said, when you get an interview, you don't stop, you keep applying because the chances of the one interview that's going to get you a job is unlikely, right? You usually have to go through a few interview processes before you get some offers. And so keep applying even if you get an interview. Otherwise, I've had a lot of clients too. They go through the interview and then they're done that and they didn't work out. And now they're like, oh, I'm like, what's the next one? And they're like, I don't have anything right now. I have to start applying again.
Yes.
So that way you keep it going and you keep getting interviews and it feels like the momentum is moving forward.
Yeah. The mental health slide, if you're going to be the one and done where you only have that one position you're working on and it doesn't work out is significant. I think it's actually more significant than the actual layoff. Because you're convinced that it's going to work out. So please make sure we have multiple things we're working on. It's also interesting in terms of the metrics around that and monitoring those. Obviously, is hugely important for people to have a feeling of success from week to week and day to day to know that hey, I'm making progress. It may not be that I have interviews lined up, but I have progress because I'm making those connections and having those conversations I need to have, which is obviously a big component of it. How about when we now are moving through the interview process and we're getting into, I'm looking at 2 different positions and trying to figure out like where do I go? Again, with our mental health intact in mind, what's important to remember?
Yeah. So that happens a lot to clients where they get an offer, but they're in another interview process that maybe hasn't fully panned out yet, but the job looks better. So what do? Do they accept this position and then just stick with it? Do they tell them to wait? So there's a whole, like, if you get the offers at the same time, that's great. Then you can compare and you could decide. But a lot of times of course, things don't shake out perfectly like that. And so the one thing I encourage people to think about is a company won't hesitate to lay you off if they are struggling or they want to save money. And so at the end of the day, you have to look out for yourself.
Yep.
That's just the truth. So if you get a job offer and it's decent, but not your dream job, then accept it and keep interviewing. You can accept it. You can start making money, looking after yourself and your family, and you can keep interviewing. And then what I encourage people to do, if let's say 2 months later, you get another job offer and it's $50,000 more and there's no way you can turn it down. Go back to the original employer and say, hey, I got this job offer. This was an interview process that I started long before I started here. I just wanted to see it through. Is there any way you can match the wage? They're going to say no if it's really big, right? If it's a big wage, they're going to say no. And then you can say, well, unfortunately, I just can't turn this down. And who's going to fault you for that? No one would fault you for taking a lot more money in that case. So, I mean, that's a tactful way to handle it, is to go back to your current employer and just have that conversation with them. And they'll usually understand. Will they be happy about it? I don't know, probably not. But it's at the end of the day, you're the one who has to make the decision for your life. And like I said, I mean, I've worked with people, listen to this story. 2 people in the past 2 months quit their job to join a startup. 3 days before they were supposed to join the startup was like, oh, just kidding. We don't have any money.
Holy
so they had already quit their job. So they can't go back. They've already been replaced. And now they don't have a job. So this is what I'm saying. You can't rely on the fact that a company is going to keep you. So you need to look out for yourself. Of course, do your best not to burn bridges. You like be as respectful as you can through the entire process. But at the end of the day, the company's not looking out for you. So you need to look out for you.
Yeah, that's really important feedback in the process is, being real with what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and certainly, again, having more than one option so that you're looking at multiple things that could possibly fit. Because you also may run into something at the tail end of your process that says, you know what, I wasn't thinking about this move, but I like this more. And so I'm kind of glad I stumbled on it. And now this is what I would like to do. So very, very important. What about in terms of in the job, you've got it started. There's no other activity that you're worried about because this is the right job for you. That startup period in a brand new job where you're onboarding and learning and all that stuff, there's some hazards there. How do we cope with those? Managing that new schedule, managing the new learning curve that we're in. Any recommendations there?
Yeah, I think it's just around being really gentle with yourself. Because I think what a lot of people will do is they'll get into it and then they'll just keep everything else in their life going, right? And they're just like, okay, now I'm learning a whole new job and maybe I have a side business and maybe I have 3 kids and maybe, and you're just still going and going and going. And it's just, it can be a lot and you can burn out really quickly, especially if it's a really like high learning curve job. And so just be gentle with yourself. Maybe there's some things you need to pause for a little bit. Maybe, maybe there's some things that you're doing, some extracurriculars or some things in your personal life that you might be able to just stop for a little, just that you have the space to process what you're learning. And I would also say is, I know self-care is like talked about all the time, but like, so what kind of self-care are you doing? Are you looking after yourself? Are you taking that time? And self-care doesn't have to be like, having a bubble bath, but like, are you eating right? Are you sleeping properly? Are you exercising? Like those key wellness pillars, I think are the most important part of the self-care. And so making sure that you have space for that kind of stuff. So that you can make sure that you're bringing your best to the job as well as you're learning and as you're in that probation phase.
Yeah, and it's so easy to develop new habits at that point in time that are not necessarily positive. So keep in mind the things you're starting to develop and the routines can be harder to break later also. So definitely the self-care is important. All right, Steph, my favorite question to ask every guest. You have a really interesting background in terms of the shifts that you've made through your career. What's your why?
My why for my business?
Yeah, for your why for you. Like, why do you do what you do?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. I think that the reason I shifted gears to talk more about the mental health side of career development is because I spent 2 years in a toxic work environment where every day I would shake on my way to work because my boss was an alcoholic and she was bipolar. And so every day was a question mark. I didn't know what I was getting. I didn't know how the day was going to shake out. I didn't know anything. And so it was really, really stressful. And the people that I have talked to over the past 5 years, there are so many stories like that. And nobody talks about them because everyone's afraid to voice them. Everyone's afraid to say, well, I don't want to talk bad about my employer or whatever. Yeah. But like the truth is, I've talked to someone whose boss bought her a gym membership and she was required to go to the gym on lunch break. If she didn't go for a run that was long enough, he would tell her to go back running again. Like these are wild, true stories that are happening out there in the workforce. And so I just that is why I started talking about the mental health side of things. And also just, I think during the layoff period, people always cry on calls with me and then apologize for crying. And I'm like, no, it's totally fine. Like this is normal. These are normal feelings. This is normal part of the process. And so, it's just something that I think people are ashamed to feel feelings around work. And a lot of things that I also hear is, I should just be grateful for what I have. And it's like, yes, you can also be grateful, but you can also be unhappy and want something different. And so I don't know if any of this is just, you got me just ranting now about this topic because I just love it so much. But I think that is really what it's about. I think that people aren't heard properly. I think that people are ashamed to have feelings around their jobs, and that people feel like if they're not happy, they should just be grateful and just accept what they have. Because yes, there are people out there who aren't employed, but that doesn't mean that you can also not want something different. So I really want to like empower people in the workforce. And really, like at the end of the day, I think a big part of what I'm interested in doing in the future is helping companies really focus on the mental health of their people, because that's where it starts, right? If a company is going to be really strong with the mental health side, they're going to keep people longer, and people are going to be happier, and they're going to be more productive. So they're going to make more money, which at the end of the day is what they really care about. So,
yeah. And the bottom line also is, this is often a term that's used when people are looking at counteroffers. That paycheck is not going to come every day. It's not going to be the constant reminder of how much money that they're making. What they will be reminded every day is how they feel in the car on the way home and the way to work. And so I hate that you went through that, and I hate that other people go through it. But I also love the fact that you've taken that to be an opportunity to say like, hey, we don't owe it to somebody to be abused, even if it's at work. So let's be attentive to ourselves in this process, and let's find something that's fair, so that we can feel good about ourselves and our day and our job, and maybe be a little bit more proud of that card that we have that we exchange when we're meeting somebody, right? So this has been excellent stuff. I really have enjoyed getting to talk to you. I'm sure our audience is like absolutely loving this conversation right now. So tell us, how do people reach you? How can they reach out to you to talk more?
Yeah, I'm usually on LinkedIn. So I create content on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Steph Gillies. I also have a website, stephgillies.com, that you can take a look at. And that's pretty much mostly where I hang out. I don't really hang out anywhere else. So
okay. All right. We will find you on LinkedIn. This has been great. If you guys have enjoyed the show, please go ahead and give us 5 stars. Share it with somebody that maybe is facing some of these tough decisions. Maybe they're going through the layoff. Maybe they've got a terrible boss. Maybe they just need to have a little bit of reality in their world to say, like, I could be happier. Share this with them. Make sure that they have the help that they need. Look out for each other. Go ahead and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.